I asked myself if I should really show myself. I, I haven't taken a shower this morning and my hair's all messed up. I've got egg on my shirt. Wait a minute. It's pretty. I got egg right here. Yeah, there it is. The yellow stuff right there. I'm a mess. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started, I guess. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Look at this. Spelled chapter psychological and measurement, all spelled correctly. Anyway, not important. Okay. We're talking about psychological measurement today. Researchers Tara McDonald and Elena Martineau were interested in the effect of female college students' moods on their intentions to have unprotected sexual intercourse. This was in 2002. In a careful designed empirical study, they found that being in a negative mood increased intentions to have unprotected sex, but only for students who were low in self-esteem. Although there are many challenges involved in conducting a study like this, one of the primary ones is the measurement of the relevant variables. So what are we looking for? We're looking for the desire to have sex, we're looking for whether they have low self-esteem, and we're looking for negative moods. So how do we measure all that? This is a condom with a break in it. I thought it was better than showing two people having sex. Or maybe not. In this study, the researchers needed to know whether each of their participants had high or low self-esteem, which of course required measuring their self-esteem. They also needed to be sure that their attempt to put people into a negative mood, or by having them think negative thoughts, was successful, which required measuring their moods. Finally, they needed to see whether self-esteem and mood were related to participants' intentions to have unprotected sexual intercourse, which required measuring these intentions. Now, I see a lot of problems with this. I see a lot of problems with this research. And one of the problems that I see is that measuring self-esteem might be a trick. Um, are people really going to tell you if they have low self-esteem or not? You're going to give them some kind of a scale, some kind of a test to find out if they have low self-esteem. The other one is, can you really put somebody in a bad mood just by giving them negative thoughts? And the third one has to do with sexual intercourse. Some people never want to have sexual intercourse. So I'm just thinking that this has a lot of problems, and they're going to be assuming that they're getting good results when potentially they're not. And I don't have any doubts that when you're in a negative mood and you have low self-esteem, that you're more that I don't know. I don't know if you'd be more willing to have unprotected sex or not. They're talking about college girls, and this was in 2002. I see a lot of problems in this, but it was the example given in the book, so let's go ahead and talk about it. To students who are just getting started in psychological research, the challenge of measuring such variables might seem insurmountable. It seems insurmountable to me because I don't think you can change somebody from a positive mood to a negative mood. I just don't think you can do that by saying, your puppy just got hit by a car. Well, is that going to do it? Well, I don't really have dogs, and I don't like them anyway. So they're going to use the same. Anyway, this is one of my problems with psychological research. They make too many assumptions. Oh, I'll just tell them that 6 is 7, and they'll believe it. Is it really possible to measure things as intangible as self-esteem, mood, or intention to do something? And I would say no. The Rosenberg self-esteem scale is one of the most common measures of self-esteem, and the one that McDonald and Martineau used in their study. Okay, and this is it. You can read the questions. On the whole, I am satisfied with myself. At times, I think I am no good at all. I feel that I have a number of good qualities. I'm able to do things as well as most other people. I feel I do not have much to be proud of. I certainly feel useless at times. I feel that I'm a person of worth, at least on an equal plane with others. I wish I could have more respect for myself. All in all, I'm inclined to feel that I'm a failure. I take a positive attitude toward myself. I don't know if you see that as actually giving you a self-esteem scale, but Rosenberg came up with it, and people have been using it since 1989. Measurement is the assignment of scores to individuals so that the scores represent some characteristic of the individual. This very general definition is consistent with the kinds of measurement that everyone is familiar with. It's also consistent with measurement throughout the sciences. This general definition of measurement is consistent with the measurement in psychology, too. Psychological measurement is often referred to as psychometrics. And of course, that's a question that I'm going to ask you on the quiz. Uh, what is psychological measurement? What's another name for psychological measurement? And the answer is psychometrics. Psycho meaning of the brain, and metrics meaning measurement. Many variables studied by psychologists are straightforward and simple to measure. These include age, height, weight, and birth order. Other variables studied by psychologists are not so straightforward or simple to measure. We cannot accurately assess people's level of intelligence or their self-esteem by looking at them. These kinds of variables are called constructs, a variable that cannot be observed directly because it represents a tendency to behave in certain ways or a complex pattern of behavior and internal processes. These include personality traits, emotional states, attitudes, and abilities. And that's one of the problems with psychology anyway. And this is also one of the reasons why people from physics and chemistry and biology refer to psychology as a soft science because these things are so difficult to measure. It's easy to measure gravity. It's easy to measure the weight of something or to estimate the weight of something. But it's difficult to measure personality. It's difficult to measure emotional states, attitudes, and abilities. Any of these things are very difficult to measure. Anything that has to do with humans, pretty much. Psychological constructs cannot be observed directly. One reason is that they often represent tendencies to think, feel, or act in certain ways. For example, to say that a particular college student is highly extroverted does not necessarily mean that they're behaving in an extroverted way right now. It means that they have a general tendency to behave in extroverted ways, like talking and laughing, across a variety of situations. Another reason psychological constructs cannot be observed directly is that they often involve internal processes. The conceptual definition of a psychological construct describes the behaviors and internal processes that make that construct along with how it relates to other variables. For example, a conceptual definition of neuroticism would be that it is people's tendency to experience negative emotions such as anxiety, anger, and sadness across a variety of situations. This definition might also include it has a strong genetic component, remains fairly stable over time, and is positively correlated with the tendency to experience pain and other physical symptoms. Many scientific constructs do not have counterparts in everyday language. Researchers develop definitions that are more detailed and precise and that more accurately describe the way the world is than the informal definitions in the dictionary. They do this by proposing conceptual definitions, testing them empirically, and revising them as necessary. They are definitions that fit this idea. This is only used in psychology. While the conceptual definition of a construct tells us what the construct is, the operational definition of a variable tells us how the construct is to be measured in a particular context. Operational definitions generally fall into one of three broad categories. Self-report measures are those in which participants report on their own thoughts, feelings, and actions, as with the Rosenberg self-esteem scale. Behavioral measures are those in which some other aspect of participants' behavior is observed and recorded. And physiological measures are those that involve recording any of the wide variety of physiological processes, including heart rate and blood pressure, galvanic skin response, hormone levels and electrical activity, and blood flow in the brain. These are your physiological measures. In this case, they're talking about overexertion. What is it? Working too hard and this is working and feeling exhausted. And this has to do with working, doing something physical, and actually physiologically being exhausted. When psychologists use multiple operational definitions of the same construct, either within a study or across studies, they are using converging operations. When multiple operational definitions are closely related to each other and produce the same pattern of results, this constitutes evidence that the construct is being measured effectively and is a useful one. The idea is that the various operational definitions are converging on the same construct. When scores based on several different operational definitions are closely related to each other and produce similar patterns of results, this constitutes a good evidence that the construct exists as defined and is being measured effectively. And this is the trick. This is what I was talking about before. So if we're talking about if we're talking about a self-esteem construct, how do you measure that? Do you have high self-esteem? Well, right this second, I feel pretty damn good. But, later on, when after I've worked all day and I'm worried about grading, this is the third week I haven't graded anything yet. Maybe my self-esteem won't be so high. I have other things to do and I can't get to my grading. That lowers my self-esteem. But then tomorrow I'll do all my grading and I'll feel pretty damn good. I'm pretending I'm going to do my grading tomorrow. Oh, yeah, I'm putting all this stuff together. You know what happened at the beginning of the semester. They didn't even turn on our class until Thursday. They were supposed to turn it on the week before. Anyway, so two things happened. One, actually that wouldn't have worked anyway. I have to put both these classes together, and I'm putting them together piece by piece. If I have taught these classes a lot. I probably could have used. See, I changed textbooks for research methods. I'm really having a hard time finding a good research methods textbook. And this is probably the last time I'll teach this, so I won't have to worry about it anymore. I know what I want you to know, but sometimes they put so much extraneous material in there in the textbooks. And I'm trying to find one that's simple enough that it makes sense to me. What am I talking about? Converging? Yeah. So you can see these guys. Well, is it a structure? The idea is it a formed structure? And all these guys are thinking different things, but as long as they are a formed structure, everything's fine. They're all in agreement. It's a formed structure, even though one's a circle, one's a triangle, and the other is a square. The nominal level of measurement is used for categorical variables and involves assigning scores that are category labels. Category labels communicate whether any two individuals are the same or different in terms of the variable being measured. For example, if you look at your research participants as they enter the room, decide whether each one is male or female, and type this information into a spreadsheet. You are engaged in nominal level measurement. Or if you ask your participants to indicate which of several ethnicities they identify themselves with, you're again engaging in nominal level measurement. And of course, this happens all the time. We try to determine whether somebody is this or that or the other. Right now, they're rounding up immigrants around the United States. So one of the things that they're trying to do is trying to determine if somebody is Hispanic or not, because a lot of immigrants are from Mexico and from South and Central America. One of the problems is that they're rounding up American Indians. They're rounding up indigenous people who've lived in the area that is the United States, for eons. They're rounding them up too. And this is something they've told people on the Navajo Nation. If somebody asks you if you're to show them ID, you have to show them ID, even though it seems stupid to me. Anyway. And that's because they're looking at skin tone, they're looking at skin color and trying to determine what race you are. And there are a lot of people from South and Central America who are actually indigenous. The Mayans, the Aztec, the Quichua. Um, those individuals, the people with more indigenous ancestry, are going to look more like Dene. They're going to look more like the Blackfeet up in Montana. Anyway, that's a nominal level of measurement, what race you are. The ordinal level of measurement involves assigning scores so that they represent the rank order of individuals. Rank communicate not only whether any two individuals are the same or different in terms of the variable being measured, but also whether one individual is higher or lower on the variable. Letter grades, economic status, first and second person in a competition. Oh, this came up this weekend. This weekend, I ran track when I was in college, and this kind of stuff is important, but it's not important. I mean, it's like history. I still hold a record at my college. We set it in 1969, so you can imagine how pissed off everybody is because they can't break it. That's really 1969. That's 31 plus 25. That's 56 years ago. We set a record. And last year, no, it's 2023, they tied the record. They actually tied our record. But the problem is that in 1969, when we set the record, we were running in yards. We were running yards. It's 440 yards. And now it's in meters. And so, in order for them to race against our time, they had to convert our time to meters. And we ran a 42 flat 440. This is a 4 by 100 relay. We ran a 42 flat, and it converts to 4176.76. So the track coach decided he was going to round it up to 8. So it's 41.8. And they ran that. They ran a 41.8. But, so are they second? Because they're four 100ths of a second behind us? The answer is they should be, but that's not the way it's working out because he decided he would round ours up. And now they tied our record. But they took our names down. And that's what I was complaining about. Anyway, education level. Are you in the elementary school, high school, college, graduate school? Those are all ordinal level measurements. The interval level of measurement involves assigning scores so that They represent the precise magnitude of the difference between individuals, but a score of 0 does not actually represent the complete absence of the characteristic. Now, the 0 is important. You can't have 0 clothing size. Actually, my daughter used to wear a 0. And there are actually sizes smaller than that. I got a cat fight. Wait a second. Stop. Sorry. My cats were fighting. Okay. Two of my cats were fighting. Okay, so there's no 0. There's no 0 calendar years. There's no 0 score in IQ. There's no 0 score in clothing size. There's no 0 size in shoe. If you've got feet, you've got a size. Income level, there's no 0. A classic example is a measurement of heat using the Celsius or Fahrenheit scale. The difference between temperatures at 20 degrees centigrade and 25 degrees centigrade is precisely 5 degrees. But a temperature of 0 degrees centigrade does not mean that there is a complete absence of heat. In psychology, the intelligence quotient IQ often considered to be measured at the interval level. There is no 0 in intelligence. The ratio level of measurement involves assigning scores in such a way that there is a true 0 point that represents a complete absence of quantity. Height measured in meters and weight measured in kilograms are good examples. So are counts of discrete objects or events, such as number of siblings one has, or the number of questions a student answers correctly on an exam. I mean, I can have no brothers and sisters. I have 5, but somebody may be an only, and they have 0 brothers and sisters, and that's possible. You can't have negative siblings. How do researchers know that the scores actually represent the characteristic, especially when it is a construct like intelligence, self-esteem, depression, or working memory capacity? The answer is that they conduct research using the measure to confirm that scores make sense based on their understanding of the construct being measured. This is an extremely important point. Psychologists do not simply assume that their measures work. Instead, they collect data to demonstrate that they do work. If their research does not demonstrate that a measure works, they stop using it. You can't use something that doesn't really do what you say it does. So if you're trying, well, if I'm trying to measure resilience, well, how in the world do you measure resilience? That's an odd construct. That's an odd idea. Resilience. And maybe you don't have resilience all the time. Wait a minute. Of course you. Oh, okay. Wait a minute. So how do we measure it? Well, we come up with a resilience scale, and then we check it against lots and lots and lots of different people. The resilience score that scale that I used was standardized at an old folks home, as interesting as that is. It was created by a nurse, and she decided that she was going to measure the resilience of the people that she worked for, or that she worked with, in an old folks home in Washington State, as a matter of fact. And she measured their resilience, and she got their stories, and she compared their stories with their resilience level that she measured, and she came up with a way of measuring resilience. And then they did it with a larger population of that people weren't that old, and they came up with resilience, a resilience scale. They did it over and over and over and over again. If you look at my research, if you look at my dissertation, you'll see that there's a whole table of people that have used her resilience scale to measure their resilience, and they've done it with whole populations. So I decided, hey, this looks like it's been standardized using a lot of individuals. I wonder if it would work with indigenous people, with the people of Fort Belknap, and that's what I used. And I discovered that their resilience level was really high as compared to people in Cincinnati, as compared to a group of people in Africa, as compared to a group of people in Berlin, Germany. This is before the wall came down. Um, there's they it was standardized and it looked like a good scale. The question was, and one of the reasons I had so much trouble getting it approved was the fact that they weren't sure it would work with indigenous people. Actually, the people on the reservation were afraid it would show that they weren't resilient. Well, that's a little strange because they had survived up to this point. They were fairly happy people, uh, and they had a strong culture, and that's exactly what it showed. Reliability refers to the consistency of a measure. The psychologists consider three types of consistency: over time, the test-retest reliability, across items, internal consistency, and across the different researchers, inter-rater reliability. And these are we're talking about the difference between reliability and validity. When the researchers measure a construct that they assume to be consistent across time, then the scores they obtain should also be consistent across time. Test-retest reliability is the extent to which this is actually the case. For example, intelligence is generally thought to be consistent across time. A person who is highly intelligent today will be highly intelligent next week. This means that any good measure of intelligence should produce roughly the same scores for this individual next week as it does today. Clearly, a measure that produces highly inconsistent scores over time cannot be a very good measure of a construct that is supposed to be consistent. Assessing test-retest reliability requires using the measure on a group of people at one time, using it again on the same group of people at a later time, and then looking at test-retest correlation between the two sets of scores. This is typically done by graphing the data in a scatter plot and computing Pearson's R. In general, a test-retest correlation of plus zero point 0.8 or greater is considered indicating good reliability, and that's exactly what we see here. Some people had exactly the same scores, and other people are kind of spread out. But all they need is 80% correlation, or zero point 0.8 uh, correlation. A second kind of reliability is internal consistency, which is the consistency of the people's responses across the items on a multiple item measure. In general, all the items on such measures are supposed to reflect the same underlying construct, so people's scores on those items should be correlated with each other. For example, people might make a series of bets in a simulated game of roulette as a measure of their level of risk seeking. This measure would be internally consistent to the extent that the individual participants' bets were consistently high or low across trials. So it's the same thing at different times from the same person. Like test-retest reliability, internal consistency can only be assessed by collecting and analyzing data. One approach is to look at a split half correlation. This involves splitting the items into two sets, such as the first and second halves of the items, or the even and odd numbered items. Then a score is computed for each set of items, and the relationship between the two sets of scores is examined. A split half correlation of plus 0.80 Pearson's R or greater is generally considered good internal consistency. So once again, it's plus 0.80. Doesn't have to be perfect. Many behavioral measures involve significant judgment on the part of the observer or a rater. Inter-rater reliability is the extent to which different observers are consistent in their judgments. Inter-rater reliability is often assessed using Cronbach's alpha, when the judgments are quantitative, or an analogous statistic called Cohen's K for kappa, Cohen's kappa, when they are categorical. And that's the formula for it. Validity is the extent to which the scores from a measure represent the variable that they are intended to. But how do researchers make this judgment? We have already considered one factor that they take into account: reliability. When a measure is consistent across time, across items, and across raters, researchers should be more confident that the scores represent what they are supposed to. And this is reliability and validity. This is evidence of reliability. They all hit the mark, but they're not valid because they're not close enough to exactly where you want it to be. But all the arrows are going in the same place. So we know that the test is consistent. It's reliable. It measures, you get the same score every time you try to use it. But it doesn't hit exactly what you're looking for. So it doesn't have validity. You're not measuring the right thing. The example I've always given is a paper and pencil test for pilots. You're testing their ability to fly, and if you give them paper and pencil test and you grade off for misspellings, then probably that's not a very valid test, because spelling has very little to do with flying an airplane. You want them to know all the answers. Well, maybe they know the answers, they just can't spell the answers. Does that make them a bad pilot? And the answer is no, it doesn't have anything to do with that. Face validity is the extent to which a measurement method appears on its face to measure the construct of interest. Although face validity can be assessed quantitatively by having a large sample of people rate a measure in terms of whether it appears to measure what it is intended to, it is usually assessed informally. Face validity is very weak, evidence that a measurement method is measuring what is intended. It just looks like it measures it, or it doesn't look like it measures it. That's face validity. It is based on people's intuitions about human behavior, which are frequently wrong. It is also the case that many established measures in psychology work quite well despite lacking face validity. And those are the things that I was talking about before. I'm not exactly sure if Rosenzberg's self-esteem scale actually measures self-esteem, but it doesn't. To me, it doesn't have face validity. But it's been used over time, and people have accepted it. And some of the questions look like they might be okay, but I'm not exactly sure if they show self-esteem. Content validity is the extent to which a measure covers the construct of interest. Attitudes are usually defined as involving thoughts, feelings, and actions towards something. By this conceptual definition, a person has a positive attitude toward exercise to the extent that they think positive thoughts about exercising, they feel good about exercising, and they actually exercise. And this is me this afternoon. Today's my lifting day. So I have positive thoughts about exercising, about lifting. I feel good about lifting. I can't wait until I get to the gym, and I will actually do my lift, which takes a little over an hour. But I have to get back in time to take my grandson to soccer practice, so I'm under the gun. So to have good content validity, a measure of people's attitudes toward exercise would have to reflect all three of these things. They have to think positive thoughts about it, they have to feel good about it, and they actually have to do it. Like face validity, content validity is not usually assessed quantitatively. Instead, it is assessed by carefully checking the measurement method against the conceptual definition of the construct. Criterion validity is the extent to which people's scores on a measure are correlated with other variables known as criteria that one would expect to be them to be correlated with. A criterion can be any variable that one has reason to think should be correlated with the construct being measured, and there will usually be many of them. Assessing criterion validity requires collecting data using the measure. So, in the Rosenberg self-esteem scale, there are aspects in the questions that are criteria that people would expect to be in a scale dealing with self-esteem. Having a clear and complete conceptual definition of a construct is a prerequisite for good measurement. It allows you to make sound decisions about exactly how to measure the construct. If you wanted to measure people's memory, you would have to determine what kind of memory. Psychologists now conceptualize memory as a set of semi-independent systems. You would have to be more precise about what you mean by memory. Once you have a clear conceptual definition of a variable, you need to decide on an operational definition. It is usually a good idea to use an existing measure that has been used successfully in previous research. Among the advantages are that A, you save the time and trouble of creating your own. B, there is already some evidence that the measure is valid if it has been used successfully. And C, your results can more easily be compared with and combined with previous results. In fact, if there already exists a reliable and valid measure of a construct, other researchers might expect you to use it unless you have a good idea and clearly stated reason for not doing so. And this is what most people do. They come up with a research that they want to do, and they look for a measurement that has already been standardized, that has already been that people consider valid. If they create their own, you're not exactly sure if your own is going to actually measure what you say it's going to measure. And it may take several attempts at using it to show that it actually does measure what you say it measures. If you choose to use an existing measure, you may still have to choose among several alternatives. You might choose the most common one, the one with the best evidence of reliability and validity, the one that best measures a particular aspect of a construct that you are interested in, for example, a physiological measure of stress if you are most interested in its underlying physiology, or even the one that would be easiest to use. When an existing measure was created primarily for use in scientific research, it is usually described in detail in a published research article and is free to use in your own research with a proper citation. The American Psychological Association, the APA, has a database called PsycTests. It catalogs over 50,000 psychological measures that have appeared in the research literature, providing links to relevant articles and additional information, and its development and evaluation. In many cases, you can download a copy of the measure itself. A similar resource that may be available online is Mental Measurements Yearbook with tests in print. Many existing measures, especially those that have applications in clinical psychology, are proprietary, and you're going to have to buy them because they're proprietary. Instead of using an existing measure, you might want to create your own. Perhaps there is no existing measure of the construct you are interested in, or existing ones are too difficult or time-consuming to use. Or perhaps you want to use a new measure specifically to see whether it works in the same way as existing measures. That is, to demonstrate converging operations. Really bad idea to make up your own. You have to standardize it, you have to show that it is reliable, and you also have to show that it is valid. But I'm going to tell you how to do it anyway. Be aware that most new measures in psychology are really variations of existing measures, so you should still look to the research literature for ideas. Perhaps you can modify an existing questionnaire, create a paper and pencil version of the measure that is normally computerized, or vice versa, or adapt a measure that has traditionally been used for another purpose. When you create a new measure, you should strive for simplicity. Your participants are not as interested in your research as you are, and they will vary widely in their ability to understand and carry out whatever task you give them. You should create a set of clear instructions using simple language that you can present in writing or read aloud, or both. Include one or more practice items so participants can become familiar with the task. Build in an opportunity for them to ask questions before continuing. Keep the measure brief to avoid boring or frustrating your participants to the point that their responses start to become less reliable and valid. The need for brevity needs to be weighed against the fact that it is nearly always better for a measure to include multiple items rather than a single item. Multiple items are often required to cover a construct adequately and assure content validity. When several responses are summed or averaged, it produces more reliability. However, multiple items must be structured in a way that allows them to be combined into a single overall score by summing or averaging. The very best way to assure yourself that your measure has clear instructions, includes sufficient practice, and is an appropriate length is to test several people. You need to standardize it. You need to make sure it really measures what you say it measures. Observe them as they complete the task, time them, and ask them afterward to comment on how easy or difficult it was, whether the instructions were clear, and anything else you might be wondering about. It is better to discover problems with the measure before beginning any large-scale data collection. You will want to implement any measure in a way that maximizes its reliability and validity. It is best to test everyone under similar conditions that ideally are quiet and free of distractions. Testing participants in groups is often done because it is efficient, but be aware that it can create distractions that reduce the reliability and validity of the measure. As always, it is good to use previous research as a guide. If others have successfully tested people in groups using a particular measure, then you should consider doing it too. Be aware that people can react in a variety of ways to being measured that reduce the reliability and validity of the scores. Although some disagreeable participants might intentionally respond in ways meant to mess up a study, participant reactivity is more likely to take the opposite form. Agreeable participants might respond in ways they believe they are expected to. They might engage in socially desirable responding. Research studies can have built-in demand characteristics, cues to how the researcher expects participants to behave. Your own expectations bias participants' behaviors in unintended ways. There are several precautions you can take to minimize reactivity. Make the procedure as clear and brief as possible so that participants are not tempted to take out their frustrations on your results. Guarantee participants' anonymity and make clear to them that you are doing so. If you are testing them in groups, be sure that they are seated far enough apart that they cannot see each other's responses. Give them all the same type of writing implement so that they cannot be identified by ink color. Allow them to seal completed questionnaires into the individual envelopes or put them into a drop box where they immediately become mixed with other questionnaires. Although informed consent requires telling participants what they will be doing, it does not require revealing your hypothesis or other information that might suggest to participants how you expect them to respond. You should standardize all interactions between researchers and participants by always reading the same set of instructions word for word. Once you have tested your measure, you are in a position to evaluate reliability and validity. Even if the measure has been used extensively by other researchers and has already shown evidence of reliability and validity, you should not assume that it worked as expected for your particular sample and under your particular testing conditions. You now have additional evidence bearing on the reliability and validity of the measure, and it would make sense to add that evidence to the research literature. In most research designs, it is not possible to assess test-retest reliability because participants are tested at only one time. For a new measure, you might design a study specifically to assess its test-retest reliability by testing the same set of participants at 2 times. In other cases, a study designed to answer a different question still allows for the assessment of test-retest reliability. Criterion and discriminant validity can be assessed in various ways. If your study included more than one measure of the same construct or measures of conceptually distinct constructs, then you should look at the correlations among these measures to be sure that they fit your expectations. Note also that a successful experimental manipulation also provides evidence of criterion validity. If your newly collected data casts doubt on the reliability or validity of your measure, you have to ask why. It could be that there is something wrong with your measure or how you administered it. It could be that there is something wrong with your conceptual definition. It could be that your experimental manipulation failed. In short, it is back to the drawing board to revise the measure, revise conceptual definition, or try a new manipulation. And this is the reason why you should use a measure that has already been standardized, one that has already has known reliability and validity. If you try to make your own, then this is always going to be a question. How reliable? It doesn't really measure what you say it measures. Uh, sometimes uh, sometimes you can add things to existing structures. Um, and that's a possibility. Sometimes that will happen. So you just have to contact the author and say, "Hey, look, this is great, but it doesn't give me all the information I need. I was wondering if I can if I can add something to it." Now, a lot of times they'll say no because that means that they can't use your data. They won't be able to go back and say, "Hey, look, this proves that what we said, 10 years ago is still viable today because you changed it." Okay, so it really all depends. And that's the end of today's lecture. I'll talk to you again next week. Wait a second.